coming back to you with something really important, in my opinion. By now you've seen this last week, Credit Suisse came out and said, "Hey, I want to tell you, movies are done recovering." And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting news. That's a pretty big claim. Um, but wouldn't we like to know if it's true? And obviously, a lot of us have some big opinions about that. Um, but opinions don't really matter. And in particular, at this point, I'm not interested in the opinions of the news media or the financial media or even financial analysts if they won't back it up with data. And so, I think all of us are deciding we're pretty tired of being lied to. We're pretty tired of being told where to invest to enrich other people. And it's time for us to take control of our own investment decisions and teach each other and share with each other. So, Credit Suisse, this is coming straight at you. This is in your face, by design, for you. You're on notice. So first off, we saw their claim and CNBC's claim. So this is for you too, CNBC. Apes are taking notice. And frankly, we're not helping you with your clickbait anymore either. And we're not going to be listening to your points of view if you don't back it up with data. So I'm coming at you with real data. And, I hope this makes it to people at the SEC, people at the Department of Justice, because I'm going to prove that folks are lying to our faces and giving financial analysis. That's the thing. Credit Suisse actually gave financial analysis. Um, so, I can sit here and share an opinion, but if you're an actual financial analyst and you share distortion, I think that's a problem. And to be honest, I think you ought to be in jail. And I'm going to show why. So, apes, buckle up. Let's go through this. Hey, these are bold claims by CNBC and Credit Suisse, but can they back them up? And I'm going to show you whether or not they can with actual data. If you followed me at all, I don't say trust me, bro. I'm going to show you the data. I'm going to show you where you can get it. I'm going to show you how to even fact check me because I welcome that because I know I'm sharing truth with integrity. These guys are just sharing points of view to help their own pocketbook. So here's how I would look at this personally and what I'm going to walk you through. And, this may take a few minutes, but I just think it's worth it. It's worth your time to understand. It is your money after all. And I think it's worth our time to be out there helping the general public understand how much they're being lied to when they're told where to put their retirement funds. That's a big deal, guys. So why don't we go ahead, if here's the claim we're going to look at. If Credit Suisse is saying essentially post-pandemic recovery for movie theaters may soon or already be over. That's CNBC's wording based on Credit Suisse's post. So that's the main thesis we're going to look at. Is the movie recovery already over? So rather than just look at current events, I want to look out a ways. We're going to look at now all the way through the end of 2024. So we're basically going to look at 9 quarters from now if you kind of count the current quarter we're in. And so, we ought to be thinking about AMC's costs. How are costs happening? So that's specific to AMC. We're going to look at AMC's revenues. We're also going to look at the industry, though. So how is the domestic box office and obviously the global box office is related to that? How's that looking? How about blockbusters? Are there big movies coming? Are studios getting out the types of movies that bring people to seats and that make a lot of money for both the studios and for AMC? And then finally, let's look at overall earnings for AMC. And so we're just going to really look at what is the overall outlook because that's what these guys are saying is, hey, they're hitting a dead end, it's over. And I'm going to say, all right, well, is that true? If it's true, you should expect we're not going to see big movies coming. Or at least we're not going to see an increase. We're not going to see growth. And you should expect the data to show the domestic box office is not going to grow. And you should expect the data to show that AMC would have a hard time with their costs and revenues. So let's just go ahead and look for real. All right, so I'm going to start off with that blockbuster view. When big movies come out, let's look at Spider-Man, No Way Home, Maverick, some other movies at that level. When the big blockbusters come out, that you have seen how much energy there is, you've seen how much people show up and buy concessions, and just the buzz it creates for the industry and for the theaters. So some of you have probably seen my presentation before. If you haven't seen that, just look it up on other videos on YouTube from me. I did a full walkthrough of all of 2023. So this particular slide I won't spend much time on because you've seen this already, or some people have seen this already. But just to make you all aware, so you can see, and I'm taking these from actual published movies coming out from the industry. So I have the actual release dates behind these as well. I have forecasts I put behind these. And I'm going to put some links at the end of this. And as always, I'll probably end up putting this on Reddit as well. And what you're going to be able to do for yourself is to say, okay, is this guy giving me facts or is he pumping? Right? So again, you can fact check me. And then you can even check industry forecasts for various movies. So for example, I'm going to show you how you could take a Guardians and you could look at, well, how did Guardians 1 and 2 do if now Guardians 3 is coming out? And what does IMDb say? What's their forecast? What does Box Office Pro say? What does, there's like 3 or 4 other sites I'm going to show you so you can actually start to add up a few. Movie Insider is another one. You can see the various forecasts and even come up with your own ideas. So the first thing off the top is, remember, Credit Suisse is saying, hey, the recovery's over. But I'm here to tell you, next year, movies that are at least $200 million of domestic box office, that's US and Canada, are increasing almost by half. So you should already be raising your eyebrows that a financial analyst is giving financial advice from Credit Suisse, who we all know is in big trouble right now, at risk of bankruptcy. Interesting timing that they would come out and say, hey guys, the movie recovery is over, when I can prove to you, I'm not making stuff up, I can prove to you that next year versus 2022, there's 44% more, and I'm going to show you the details on that a little bit in a moment, but 44% more movies that are $200 million and up. So big increase in blockbusters next year. In the meantime, Credit Suisse is telling you no more recovery. Already, that sounds ridiculous on the face of it, right? So that's just kind of stupid. So what you've got, I've got Avatar here. Remember, that comes out at the end of this year, which means, and frankly, it's big enough, it means there's enough revenue spilling into 2023 that both in 2022 and in 2023, Avatar itself is one of these big blockbusters. So it's kind of almost like twice over. Same way Spider-Man did that. It released at the end of 2021 and was huge, but then it was still huge in 2022. And then you can kind of see the rest of the list. So Mario, Guardians, Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, Wonka, Ant-Man, Marvels, Little Mermaid, Fast X, Hunger Games, Trolls. And then you can kind of see at the bottom here, and again, I've shown this before, a list of just some other big movies. And I'll give you one example, like the Miles Morales Spider-Man movies. So there's the second one of those, and you'll see in a minute. There's actually another one in 2024. Go check sometime how big those have been. And that's just one of many. So there's a lot of big movies coming next year. But then let's look at 2024. So I told you that in 2023, the big $200 million plus movies are increasing 44% from this year. Well, so maybe do they stop? Maybe Credit Suisse just tripped on their own words and they meant we got another year of recovery and then it's over. Well, I don't know, because in 2024, by the time you get to the end of 2024, we've doubled from 2022. So we're basically 2x the amount of these movies. And you can see it's plus 38% versus 2023. So this year to next, we grow 44% on these big movies, and we grow 38% over the top of that. So just think kind of compounding interest. And so we've basically doubled the amount of these big movies by 2024. Yet here today in 2022, even though we're going to have twice as many blockbusters in 2024 as we do now, Credit Suisse is telling you there's no more recovery. So far, not looking so good for them. So first of all, if you don't know, there's a Spider-Man 4. Again, think back to how big was No Way Home. Just so you know, in my forecasts, I think No Way Home was just a phenomenon. I mean, the fact that you had all 3 Spider-Man characters in it, Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield, it's a big deal. I went and saw it twice myself. So I am a little bit, I've told you in some other videos, conservative on my forecasts. I'm not forecasting Spider-Man 4 to be as big as No Way Home, but we all know it's still a big deal. You got Snow White, so the Disney live action, again, I'm going to show you a website where you can go look at the history on, say, how did Lion King do, how did Cinderella do, there's a few others, of course, how did all these do, Jungle Cruise was one. So Disney live action are actually pretty big, and I think Snow White is going to be no exception to that. I think it'll be fairly big. And you see there's actually also a prequel to Lion King. So there's Mufasa in 2024. We've got Captain America in 2024, Part 2 of Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning. I am super excited for Furiosa, so there's a Mad Max prequel. I think that movie, I guess I'm betraying some of my own opinions, but that Mad Max movie was pretty artistic for its time. It was something new and different, and frankly, if you look deeper, it had some interesting layers to the story. I think Hollywood was trying to speak some truths there. Go check that out again sometime if you haven't seen that in a while. There's a new Despicable Me. I mean, you just saw how huge the Minions movie was. A new Kung Fu Panda. Go look at the history on those. Those are really big. Deadpool 3, and I mean, you've probably seen that Hugh Jackman is bringing Wolverine into Deadpool. So Wolverine times Deadpool, that's going to be huge. There's a new Joker movie. Guess what? On the heels of Avatar in 2020, well, 2022, crossover 2023, we get another Avatar. And by the way, if you don't know, there's going to be 4 of those total. So this is the 3rd out of 4. And then I've got one hiding here because dun, 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 we get a movie for us. We get a new Planet of the Apes movie, which I could not be more excited for. And I just am kind of honestly hopeful that by the time we're there, that's a pretty big celebration and we're all meeting each other up to go just kind of dunk on Hedgie in that one. And then you kind of look at the rest of the year. So you've got a few other Marvels, like Blade is sort of a reboot of a Marvel character. There's a Pixar movie. Sony, by the way, is really expanding the Spider-Man universe. So that starts to get interesting. I mentioned the Miles Morales. So there's yet another Miles Morales movie. That's the Beyond the Spider-Verse here. But then check this out. So there's an untitled Sony Marvel movie. Now you remember, so Sony basically owns all the Spider-Man IP. And then this Madam Web is another actual Spider-Man character. So you can see the writing on the wall with what Sony's doing is they've realized their way of having a whole universe rather than just a Spider-Man movie is to start expanding on that. So that's kind of interesting. So let's look at the numbers on that. So if you look at blockbusters by year, 2022, more than $100 million movies, just domestic box. You've got to kind of extrapolate out for international. I've told you on some other videos that's just because domestic's easier for me to track, but also I have a background in forecasting, so I have some formulas and functions to kind of guess at what the international revenue is too. So it's not that I ignore that. But anyway, so for 2022, we've got 18 of those sort of 100 million and up. 2023, we've got 28. So again, Credit Suisse telling you there's no more movie recovery, and yet I'm showing you, and again, you can validate this across the industry. It's 56% growth next year. So next year versus this year, it's at 156% of 2022 on those big movies. I think that sounds like growth. I don't know about you, but 56% increase sounds pretty nice to me. And then you can see that level and up is flat in 2024, but let's not stop there. Let's look at the real big movies. So I'm looking at more than 250 million, and you can see in 2022 there's 9 of those, but in 2023 there's 12 of those. So that's a third growth, 133% level, and then we jump again all the way up to 14 of those in 2024. And so that's another 17% growth on top of the 33% growth. And then I just wanted to look at even just the top 30. So you just take the biggest 30 movies of each year and how big are those. So this year it's looking like, now obviously there's some forecast in here because I'm looking at Wakanda, I'm looking at Avatar, just how big will those be within this calendar year. But most of the year is pretty baked at this point. And so you can see for 2022, the top 30 movies are a little less than $6 billion. But in 2023, it's almost $1 billion increase. It's an $80 million increase just on those 30 movies. If you stack apples to apples, top 30 versus top 30, that's 13% growth. And again, with Credit Suisse telling you there's not growth. And then in 2024, another 11% growth. We get to 2024, just the top 30 movies look like they'll be as big as almost all of 2023 as a whole. 2023, I'm going to show you later, is probably going to land a little bit above $7.5 billion for the year. You can see in 2024, just the top 30 movies are almost as big as the entire industry is in 2022, while Credit Suisse and CNBC are telling you there's no growth. I don't know how else to say it. They're insane or they're lying, or frankly both. So that's just blockbusters. That's all we're looking at so far. So let's just go ahead and say a big fat green circle on blockbusters And you look here, you can see that I'm saying is green circle for continued improvement in the forecast. Yellow will give to any of these if they're stalling or flat. Red will give if they're actually declining or worsening. So we're going to go through and see, fact check, is this stalling out like Credit Suisse told us? So all right, so blockbusters already we've established. And again, go back and actually look at the actuals. You can go find these lists. I'm going to give you the links of where to look at these, so you can see for yourself. These are actual movies announced with actual release dates. And keep in mind, for 2024, that's far enough out that there's going to be a lot of movies I don't even know about yet. So that's going to be really interesting too. All right, so first fact check, that's a big L for Credit Suisse, and also a big L for integrity, and a big L for the regulators who are doing nothing about it. Yes, Gary, I'm talking about you. All right, so total box office through 2024. Let's not just look at blockbusters. We also know one of the big issues has been we don't have enough movies. You can, again, see some of my other videos where I've talked about that. But we also know we're starting to see more and more movies. We're starting to see more $15 million movies and $20 million movies and $30 million movies. And that's awesome because that means we're getting to see more stories. It can't all just be blockbuster comic book movies and Maverick and stuff like that. I would love to have more content out there. And so that's been fun. Like my wife and I are going to go see Ticket to Paradise here soon. You know, you get those date night movies too. So that'll be fun. So let's look at that. So the total box office, first view here I've got, and I think I've tweeted about this before. If you look, I was just curious for a rolling year. And what I mean by rolling year is you can see, just take any 4 quarters and then keep advancing 1 quarter. So like Q3 of 2021 through Q2 of 2022. That's the most recent actuals we have. So for a year where we have full-on actuals and I'm not forecasting anything, that was just a little over 7 billion. So the last year we've just completed. Excuse me, I do have actuals from the box office for Q3 2022. What we don't have is the actuals on AMC until they do their earnings report. So that most recent completed year is a little over 7.5 billion. That's a pretty good year. And of course, that's got Maverick in it. It's got the Spider-Man quarter and all that. So we got some big quarters. So you can even see I'm telling you, based on my forecast currently for Q4 of 2022, this next quarter will bring us back down a little. And that's just because I think I've got Q4 about 1.95 billion. So there's a shot at 2 billion. But Q4 of last year, again, remember, we had Spider-Man. So because this fourth quarter I've got a little bit smaller than last fourth quarter, the rolling year is dipping. But then look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and this slide only goes out through the end of 23. I can tell you right now, based on what I know of 2024 and the work I've done, you could just keep going. So I would suggest you've probably got 8 straight quarters after this one completes. 8 straight quarters where this rolling year is going to keep going up, 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 up. And yet Credit Suisse is telling you the movie industry is done recovering. You tell me if that makes sense to you. Does this line go up and to the right or not? And I've shown you on some other videos. You can go check me. Again, I'm inviting you to go check industry forecasts. Don't just trust me. I'm not just making up a bunch of garbage here. In fact, I can show you that so far my forecasts have been under. Black Adam's a great example. Because I'm going public with you guys and sharing information, it's really important to me that I don't spread, what people kind of call hopium. I want to spread a realistic forecast. And if that realistic, or even let's call it conservative forecast, still shows profitability for AMC, and in other videos I've talked about that, then dang shorty's screwed, because even a conservative forecast is showing AMC moving to profits. And so, I just want to inspire a little bit of trust in these numbers. But let me also show you the total year, and let me go through 2024. Now, I just ask you, just at a glance, does this visual look to you like the recovery is done? We're here in 2022. We're going to land, I told you, a little bit above 7.5 billion for the year. Do these look like they're getting smaller to you? Because they don't to me. And what I don't even have baked in here is, let's say the euro improves and they start getting to translate European ticket sales more favorably. These numbers to the right would actually start getting even bigger. I've talked a little bit about foreign exchange in some of the other videos. So This is just a little bit on a constant currency basis, with the euro already being low, and some other currencies being fairly low against the dollar. This is just looking at the movies the industry is bringing out and what roughly would be the forecast against those. The other thing that I've shown in other videos is I planned, and I'll show you a chart later here, I'm not showing a lot of inflation in ticket prices, even though we all know there's a high likelihood that ticket prices will continue increasing, and some of these numbers could be conservative because of that. So even with conservatism in my forecast and the industry forecast, you can see it's just painfully obvious that the recovery is not done. And by the way, pre-COVID, if I had some of these, I'm going to start showing you a 2019 number. 2019 would be a little over 11 billion. So we're not even to pre-COVID levels, but again, I've done other videos that show you AMC, and I'm going to show more of that in a minute too, does not need the industry to be at pre-COVID levels, because AMC itself is actually set up more successfully right now than it was pre-COVID, and I can prove that, and I will prove that. So getting to, frankly, next year getting to 9 billion, and then the year after getting to 10 plus, is a big, 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 big deal. So we've said blockbusters, that we're giving that a big fat green circle. Domestic box office is still improving, so we're going to give that a big circle, big green circle. And again, I'm basing this on specific movies listed, although I just want to be transparent with you. For that 2024 number, I have a little bit of a plug. About 15% of that number is a plug, because it's so far out. There's a lot of movies that I'm sure we haven't heard about yet. And just a great example of that, from the past quarter or two, maybe you've heard of like Violent Night. It's that Santa movie. It looks to me like it's Die Hard meets Home Alone or something like that. And I'm laughing because it's kind of a ridiculous premise, but I'm honestly going to go see it with my oldest son, just because I think it's kind of ridiculous, so we'll go laugh at it. Well, that movie wasn't announced until, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks ago. I don't quite recall when. And so that movie wasn't even in my forecast for Q4. And I've seen that consistently. I've been tracking this for about 6 months. So I tend to have a plug number. And in forecasting, a plug just means I've got this little bucket of, hey, there's movies I don't know are coming. You know, a couple of the Japanese anime movies have shown up in the US that I didn't have forecasts either. And one of those last quarter was $30 million domestic. So that was a $30 million movie that I didn't have forecast. That's not a small number. And there's another one this quarter that did even better in Japan than the first one. Anyway, I was going to tell you the names of those, but kind of forgetting. I think this one's called One Piece Red or something, and the last one was a Dragon Ball Z movie. It's not really my zone, as you can kind of obviously hear. But there's been other movies that weren't forecast. You know, even the re-release of Avatar, I didn't have that on the radar. Well, between last quarter and this quarter, that did around $30 million. So you can see how pretty quickly there's a bunch of buckets, and that's even within a quarter. You know, it can be weeks out. Suddenly this movie pops up. You know, like right now, that Slayer movie, gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's done like $8 million, and it's still tracking to do more. Terrifier, I think, is that one. I didn't have that one anywhere in the forecast. So there's going to be a lot of movies, and you can think, if that's happening within a quarter, imagine 2 years from now, there's movies I don't know about yet. So I'm just telling you, in this $10.5 billion number, about 15% of that is a plug for me, but I feel super confident in that. And so overall, you could even just do the math. This is basically a 16% growth year over year, that I'm showing in the industry. So green circle there, Credit Suisse wrong again. And just to be honest, I mean, not just wrong, right? Like distorting, like flat out lying to your face. So let's shift from talking about the industry to talking about AMC costs. And sorry, I'm just trying to go fast here because some of this I've covered for some of you already. If you want to go deeper and just find out, hey, how did this guy get to some of these numbers? I go real deep on that in a couple other videos. So let's just, again, I don't want to give you opinion. I want to give you facts. I am sourcing these straight from AMC's financial documents they file with the SEC. And again, I'm going to give you the links for where you can go get these. There is zero trust me bro in this. So if you look at the 4-quarter average, pre-COVID, 2019, you can see Q1 through Q4 of 2019, they were paying $242 million in rent. Now, there's been a few things that have happened, and I explained some of sort of the why behind this in another video as well, and why AMC is better post-COVID than pre-COVID. I think you can just see that pretty obviously. So one is some of their rents got renegotiated. Um, if you're a mall owner and AMC is bringing traffic to your mall and there's other stores and you want all of them rented out, you're going to negotiate with sort of the anchor store, which in this case is a movie theater, who's bringing traffic. And I told you guys in another video how, I take my family out to a restaurant before we go to AMC. Well, that restaurant is next door, and so we enjoy doing that, and they both benefit. And so then the mall owner, of course, probably has some data on that. Says, when there's a big movie, my restaurants over here do well, and so they negotiate the rents with AMC. That's one. But the other thing to remember is AMC sort of reorganized which properties they even own. During the height of COVID, when things were tough, they had to make some tough decisions, and there were some lower performing properties they released that don't even operate those properties anymore and don't have the leases for those. So there are some leases that flat out went to zero because they don't even have those properties anymore. It washes out a little because they also brought in some new properties, some better performing properties. But overall, so between renegotiating rents and changing which properties they have, you can see there's kind of almost like a 10% drop in the amount of rent they pay per quarter. Now, average that or multiply that out across 4 quarters, and you can see this is like almost kind of a little over $80 million a year. That's not a small amount, and that's straight to the bottom line. So rent has gone down quite a bit, and that's one of their biggest expenses. Well, how about film costs? So one of the things that happens is when a movie theater, sells the tickets, they've got to obviously give a cut of that to the studios. Why would you make Spider-Man and spend all that money on it if you're not going to get your money back and then some? So it's really interesting to look at because this is actually one of their biggest expenses. Maybe even is their biggest expense besides OPEX. I've got to go back and look. But you can see pre-COVID, so for the entire year of 2019, and I have this in their financials, they paid a little over 50% basically of their ticket sales. They got to keep less than half of their ticket sales in 2019. So look at what's been happening recently. So 2021, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to ignore that a little because it's a pretty funky year. You don't have as many movies, it's not as big, and you might have kind of different movies that are coming out, and the studios probably made a lot of concessions. But 2022, you can see, is tracking way below COVID. And I've got to be honest too, I've heard rumblings through the industry about 2023 and beyond actually getting a little better. I have that planned mostly flat. There's kind of some nuance to those numbers. But if we start hearing that studios are giving back even more to the theaters, you could see this line over here to the right actually kind of snaking down harder. And that's a cost. This is what AMC is paying back to the studios as a percent of their ticket sales. But just clearly you can see pre-COVID versus post-COVID, they're more profitable. So they're more profitable on rents now. In other words, a lower cost. They're more profitable on how much of their ticket sales they have to give back to the studios, lower cost. So far on two of their biggest costs, I've told you, they have a lower cost now than they had pre-COVID. Well, let's look at another one of their biggest costs, borrowing costs. So you can see in 2019, they were about 290 million, just a little above. Now in 2021, they did a lot of debt restructuring, and so you can see it spiked quite a bit. There's a lot going on there, and we all kind of know that story. In 2022, now this is 2 quarters finished and 2 that I'm forecasting. But we've got announcements from Adam, like when they refinanced, I think the 75 million, and recently they refinanced Odeon's 500 and knocked that down by 106 million. And you can do the math based on the interest rate and how much debt they paid off, how that impacts the borrowing costs. And so I've got kind of a forecast here, and we'll see. I'll actualize those as more quarters come out. And I'm saying we're above COVID, so you can see 2019, about 290 million. 2022, I've got a little over 310. This is probably like 320 or something, 315. But because I know what they've paid off and also what they've refinanced and how that impacts their payments, you can see that number's trending down in future years. And if he refinances more, if he pays off more, then that number will trend down even harder. And very quickly is better than pre-COVID. So you can see rent improved. film costs improved and still improving. Borrowing costs are about back to pre-COVID and will soon be better than pre-COVID, so improving. So on all of that, the recovery is not done. And then what about depreciation and amortization? So I'm not going to explain too deeply what this is, but it's basically a non-cash cost, but it hits your earnings. And so you hear about EBITDA. This is the DA from EBITDA. It's that DA at the end. And like I said, it's not a cash expense per se. It basically reduces your earnings so that it can kind of reduce your taxes. It's a way that the American government encourages bigger investments. You can kind of depreciate those assets. And so, but it is an expense in your earnings. So will earnings look better or not? This impacts that. And in this case, you can see, again, these are actuals here. I'm only showing you actuals. Here was pre-COVID, was tracking at about 112 and a half a quarter. And then look at this. Like, I mean, the most recent quarters are not even 100. So they've gone down 15, 20%, less than that, but 13, 14%, and are still tracking down. And there's reasons for that. I don't want to get into the accounting of all that. It gets kind of wonky, but here's a big expense. So I've just shown you, and if you think about the percentage of all their expenses here, rent, film costs, borrowing costs, depreciation and amortization, all have gone down, and most of them are still going down further. So costs, and I can even give you a little bit more information. So about 37% of their costs, and some of those I've just shown you, like rent, depreciation and amortization, borrowing costs. I've also got their lease obligations, investment expense. These are all lines in their financial filings. And again, you can go fact check me on all of this. So about 37% of their costs are actually declining, or in some cases are only rising in like low single digits. So if you kind of looked across all of these, basically as a whole, they're kind of flat to declining. That's more than a third of their costs. And this is in a time of inflation. So that was one of my other videos where I was showing you guys, hey, if you're holding your costs fairly steady, but your revenue is going up because you're raising ticket prices and you're raising food prices, and they have some other areas where revenue's getting added. So if, you don't have to think hard to do the math on if your costs are not going up, but your income's going up, that's a good thing. But here's Credit Suisse saying the recovery's over. Well, heck no, it's not, because they're keeping their costs set while the domestic box office and the international box office is growing. There's more blockbusters, and they're going to be raising ticket prices along with inflation. But there's more than that. So I showed you the film costs and how that's working. So if you added, the film cost is 25% of their expenses. So that 37 and this 25, that's 62% of their costs that are basically improving. Or at least staying flat. And there's actually more besides that, because also their investment income, if you think about, if Hycroft Mining, starts to find gold or silver or, I don't know, maybe lithium or something, then that's also going to basically start to look like income rather than expense. And that gets into kind of some accounting there too. So on costs, big green circle. So far, sorry Credit Suisse, not sorry, you're 0 for 3. Let's keep going. How about revenue? How about what AMC is going to be bringing in? Now, you can guess pretty easily, because you've seen there are going to be more movies, there are going to be more big movies, and overall the movie industry is going to have more revenue. But let's look at AMC specifically. So I've shown you before, this is an old slide, so I'll go through it quickly. This is the actuals, again, from their financial filings, but although you can see to the right, I have some forecast, on food and beverage spending per attendee for AMC. Now I've talked before as well, there's some FX headwinds in here. The euro going down translates sort of our European friends' purchases a little lower when you turn that into dollars. So there's a lot of reasons why this forecast I've got to the right is pretty conservative. And I've shown some scenarios where kind of like what if. But the main thing you should take away is I've also shown how food and beverage spending is, as of next year, will already be, I think, a little bit past pre-COVID. So even and next year, I think there's basically about 2/3 of the amount of movies, or maybe it's even like only 60% versus pre-COVID. And so on a much smaller movie slate, AMC is already back to pre-COVID revenues, and will continue to grow past that. So that's a pretty big deal. And this is just the amount of money per attendee. So remember, if there's more movies, there's more attendees. So as that number starts to go up, on how many of us are coming to the movies because there's more movies. But now AMC's actually gotten us to a place where we spend more than we used to spend. It's basically a multiplier. It's going to become real big real fast. So same thing with ticket prices. You can see over here, 2019 versus where we're at now. Insane growth. And so again, just what do you think happens if there's more movies coming and we're already paying now, depends on the movie. AMC has dynamic pricing. The other day I paid $12 for my ticket to go see. Well, I have A list, but for my wife, for example, I paid $12 for her to see Black Adam with me. There's a lot of movies that are going to be. I bet the average will come in a little more like, I don't know, 10.50 to 11 something. You can see there's been quarters they've already been over 11. So actually, maybe this quarter I wouldn't be surprised if we come in even 11.50 or something like that. So you can see I'm probably conservative here as well. But the point is, all you got to do is just kind of draw a line about up here, and then you see this line down here, and you go, well, hang on, we're paying a lot more than we paid pre-COVID, and people seem to be pretty happy about it. There's a lot of people coming to these movies. And again, so what happens when there's more movies? And I've already shown you that there are more movies and more big movies. So that's a win there for AMC. Here's something, maybe a visual I haven't given yet. So other revenue, if you're on Twitter, you've seen me tweet like, hey, AMC On Demand is out there. You can rent and buy movies streaming from AMC. So that'd be like an example. Also, I saw like the Black Adam popcorn buckets sold out. And then AMC made like maybe 1,000 more, I want to say. Same thing happened with Thor. Those sold out like 3 times. They kept having to make more. I've seen T-shirts on the website. There's like even toys now. You're starting to see a lot more merchandising. So AMC's got On Demand they didn't really used to have. A lot more merchandising is happening. We've even seen they've hired a few people to manage that. And so their other revenue, as you can see, is already back to pre-COVID levels. I want to say it's like $10 or $15 million below, but it's almost the exact same. Is my forecast for this year. But climbing very fast. And there's a few other buckets of revenue in there. And part of that has to do also with how many more movies are coming out. This revenue item, while it's got some, like AMC On Demand isn't completely related to obviously movie attendance, but there's still kind of a correlation to the amount of movies and to attendance here. And obviously, you're going to sell more of those cool popcorn buckets if you have more cool blockbusters that people want to collect those on. So you can see that one's tracking pretty well. So revenue by year for AMC, you can see what pre-COVID was. I am not saying they get back to pre-COVID revenue until 2024, although you can see also I have them blowing by it. But remember this number for 2023, and remember that I've said a lot of their expenses are in many ways better than pre-COVID, because that's going to matter when I reveal this earnings box over here, okay? But so for now, revenues forecast, you can see steady growth, up and to the right. And, again, I've given some logic for how that's working in other videos, so I won't go into detail here, but just know if you're new to me, to my account or whatever, I was a mid-level executive managing forecasting teams who were forecasting $2.5 billion a year. We had 15 categories across 9 countries. I know a thing or two about forecasts. Doesn't mean I'm right. I shared it in another video. There's a saying, if you have a forecast, it's wrong. And so I'm not saying these are going to be the exact right numbers, but I am saying, I have 2 masters in business. I've managed forecasting. You can disagree with me for sure, and that we can have healthy conversations and healthy disagreement. What you can't do, especially you, Shorty, is just dismiss me. I know what I'm talking about. I've done the rigor to look at why this is the forecast, even down to thinking about FX rates and all of that kind of stuff, and looking at history and trend. I've looked at the actual movies coming. This is not hopium. I'm not just making up numbers, and frankly, I've been conservative, and I think they may be able to beat these numbers. And then, by the way, we haven't even talked about wide distribution of popcorn. What happens if popcorn's, in thousands of grocery store doors, and what is that going to look like? So, very excited about these numbers, and I'm very excited to give Credit Suisse another big fat L on AMC revenues. So far they're 0 for 4, and you can kind of already see what's coming. But before we get to earnings, I've talked a lot about pre-COVID versus post-COVID. So let's come back and cover that again. So I can, let's just say it's provable, and I can even talk through these, that in every single one of these rows you're seeing here, AMC has positioned its business, its fundamentals, better post COVID than pre COVID. So I showed you how much we're paying per ticket per person. So that's just demonstrable. It's in the financials. It's just not even debatable. So, boom, better post COVID. I just showed you the percentage of our ticket sales that are going back to the studios and how that was improved versus pre COVID. So, boom. I just showed you how we're paying more per person for food and beverage than pre COVID. Um, uh, Also, actually, in another video, I walked through how the margins are a little bit better. I guess that now is for the studio piece. That's actually this line. That's kind of redundant now, but this food and beverage piece still matters. Um, that you might say, well, yeah, we're paying more for food and beverage, but that AMC's costs must have gone up too. And I've looked at that, and actually, the cost for their food has stayed relatively even as a percent of what we pay. It's not their margins have basically improved a tiny bit. I think it was like 4 points improvement or something. So that's actually better post COVID. The property mix, I told you they dropped some underperforming properties. They've added, you remember like the Grove in LA, and there's a few others. They've added some pretty big properties. So their property mix, just in terms of how healthy are their properties, is better post COVID than pre COVID. We talked about popcorn. They were not selling popcorn, in grocery stores or these 3X bags we're all buying, Uber deliveries. All of that is post COVID and did not exist pre COVID. Merchandise, I've shared with you how that's bigger now, and how that's a focus for them. That's a revenue stream that's bigger now than pre COVID. The streaming AMC on demand, check. Uh, Gold, I'm just talking about the Highcroft mining. If that takes off ever, that didn't exist pre-COVID as far as on AMC's books. NCMI, so that's a marketing group, National Cinemedia or something like that. Um, if you remember, AMC has 6 million shares of that company, and basically pays them a fee per quarter. So I wonder if we're going to see future quarters where AMC gets more shares as well. Um, but that is something they didn't have those shares pre-COVID, and they have them now. And if NCMI ever starts to improve their business as well, and I would like to think they would, more movies coming, that's going to affect AMC's books, and that was not there pre-COVID. I've shown you how they're paying less in rent post-COVID versus pre-COVID, and then also I talked in another video about, and you may know, so they've got the licensed business in Saudi Arabia, which awesome news this last week. We just saw there are 6 more IMAX theaters opening in Saudi Arabia under the AMC banner. It's not AMC's business per se. They're not operating those locations, but what a great business model that you're entered into another country and you're getting basically a royalty check because they're using your name. And so there's a bunch of theaters, and now even IMAX theaters, that are operating under the AMC banner, and AMC did not have that pre-COVID. That's revenue now. So every single one of these, it's just, this is not even opinion. These are provable. Is better post-COVID than pre-COVID. So that I just want you to kind of wrap your head around that a little bit, because as I show you kind of their earnings, you have to understand how much work they've done to get their costs in control, how much work they've done to diversify their revenue, and obviously you add revenue streams and you get your costs in control, boy, you improve your profitability, and it shows. And so here I'll show you that. So based on those revenues I showed you, which again are specifically tied to the movies coming out, to history, to trend, and me knowing a little bit about how to forecast, you can see that, first off, this is why Shorty tries to freak you out. In 2019, which was pre-COVID, actually AMC lost money. Now there's a lot of other stuff going on at that time, and I'm not going to kind of cover the whole history again, and we don't need to do that here. And then, of course, 2021 was rough, guys. I mean, that was still reopening. We didn't have the movies back yet. Obviously, it was fun that was a fun year for me, to be honest. Like, I have some really good memories. Kong versus Godzilla was the first movie I got to go to post-COVID, and that, I live in a state that was locked down a little longer than some states, and that was like the weekend our state opened up theaters. So I have really good memories, but boy, that was a tough year for business. And then you can see 2022. I'm still showing, pretty big loss. Most of that's already in the books. It's a little skewed, right? Because the final 2 quarters, and Adam told you guys this, Each quarter now sequentially gets better and better and better. And I can see it in their numbers, and I can see it in my forecast because of the way they've gotten their costs under control in particular. Um, and because of some of the diversification of revenue we talked about. So while this number looks big, I can tell you most of that, the majority of that, or let's just say the first half of the year was a bigger loss than the second half of the year. They're getting closer and closer and closer. If I was to break this out into quarters, you'd see this tracking up towards that zero line. And then I've shown you in the other video, went deep. And if you remember that video, actually, you can see my numbers gotten a little bigger. I want to say I probably had about $50 million of earnings in that video. Recent results in movies have been a little better. There's been a couple other movies announced, that I didn't know about before. And so just a little bit of improvement. And I'm personally forecasting full year profits for 2023. And then you can see just blowing it out of the water in 2024. So on earnings, another loss for Credit Suisse. So I'm sitting here going, AMC's costs are not done improving. Revenues are not done improving. The domestic box office, and again, extrapolate that out to the international, is not done improving. Blockbusters are not done improving, and AMC's earnings are not done improving. Seems kind of bad. So I'm going to skip that slide for a second. We're going to come back to our conclusion. I just want to show you real quick, buzz through what's in the appendix, because I'm going to post this later, and you can kind of hit all these and get these slides for yourself if I put them on Reddit or on Twitter. Shown you some of these before. So movie count, you can see, just so Shorty knows, I'm not just saying all of a sudden there's pre-COVID level movies. Here's the total movies for a year. Back then, you can actually see I've got 18 in here too. Here's the total movies I've got forecast through the end of 2023. You can see it's not increasing much, and I didn't increase it much in 2024 either. So this is a very reasonable forecast, is my point. You can see AMC's attendance per movie is actually way above pre-COVID. I've talked in other videos about how, that's partly a function of there being less movies, but part of it is also because apes got excited to be loyal to AMC. You can see the US box office per movie has been increasing significantly. I won't go through this, but this was a teardown. Again, go find some of my other videos on how AMC doesn't even need to get back. You can see like in 2024, even if you had 67% of the movies, they're going to get to 100% of the ticket revenue, and actually maybe more now, because this was an old forecast I had. And then same on food and beverage. You can see here in 2023, even they get to 99% of pre-COVID revenues, even though that was on 57% of the movies. So again, they've got their costs in control. They've got their sort of revenue model is a little better than pre-COVID. And so I think Shorty would like you to think, well, they've got to get all the way back to the industry being as big as it was pre-COVID. But you got to separate out in your mind two things. There's the industry as a whole. How many movies are there? How big are they? And there's AMC's business specifically within that industry. And so if the industry is recovering, and we've talked about that, and then if AMC's, let's say, just multipliers are better, then you can see how they're going to be doing pretty well pretty fast. One thing I want to highlight that I haven't, I went over this slide in the other video, but also I did not have this item here. So, if you think about this weekend, we saw Yellowstone, we saw the Tulsa King, we know that Netflix soon is showing Glass Onion, HBO Max next year is showing Magic Mike. So look at that, 1, 2, 3 different streamers are all putting their content on. The reason, actually, by the way, Magic Mike, I'm calling that out, that originally was planned to go straight to streaming, and HBO Max changed their mind. Warner changed their mind and said, let's put that in theaters first. So you see the trend of streamers actually showing movies in theaters. I don't have that in my forecast, guys. So that's another thing that I'm telling you I'm conservative. I'm proving to you that I'm conservative. I don't even have any of these streaming events. I do have Magic Mike too, because that's an announced movie. But in general, if there's other movies where Netflix says, hey, we're going to make another Knives Out, so Glass Onion is from a Knives Out franchise, or if Paramount Plus says, okay, we're going to early release, a premiere of a show, a premiere of a season in theater, that's just revenue I haven't counted on. So just kind of be aware of that. And then I'll post these helpful links so you can see where I get my information from, the entire list of 2023 movies, the entire list of 2024. You can see some forecasts at Box Office Pro, Box Office Report, IMDb, and start to compare those forecasts against each other and even have your own opinions as well. I'm also tracking history to kind of compare some things. Another thing that's really good to do is if you go to Box Office Mojo, for example, let's say Sonic 3 is coming out in 2024, as an example. Well, Sonic 2 did really well. It was like a $200 million movie globally. Um, so you could look and say, all right, well, how big was Sonic 1? How big was Sonic 2? You could do the same, like Indiana Jones is coming out. Okay, how big were the last Indiana Jones? Well, how many years ago was that? How much bigger do I think it would be now? Um, so for a lot of franchises, I've gone back and you can look at the whole history like Scream. There's another Scream movie coming out. You can look um, movie by movie and see how did that franchise do. It kind of helps you think through the size of the next movie that's coming out for a franchise. So just some interesting information there that's really helpful. And then just to continue to prove I'm not making numbers up, I would love if people go check AMC's financial filings. You can find um, all of the information, on all those costs, especially that I was showing you. So let's go back. So by almost every objective and provable metric, the theater industry is improving. And I've shown you that whether you want to talk about blockbusters, you want to talk about total movies, even just buzz, studios having longer theatrical windows, streamers putting movies into theaters, um, you know, business expanding in Saudi Arabia and the licensing there. By every improvable uh, by every provable metric, the whole industry is improving, and AMC, frankly, is outpacing that improvement. So, Credit Suisse, CNBC, Motley Fool, either they're lying or they're bad at analysis. You decide. I think you can tell by what I've done on the slide what I think, and that